Boy, this Big 12, it's bonkers. It is absolutely nuts. Pure chaos is probably going to ensue this Saturday. This is the Locked On Baylor podcast. We're going to tell you how Baylor could get there. If you like the video, be sure to like and subscribe. Might seem simple, but most of you that watch these videos are not subscribed. So it helps out the channel a lot if you hit that like button and hit that subscribe button as well. We're trying to get it to 4,000. We are on the road. Anyway, Baylor somehow, after starting 2-4 overall and 0-3 in conference, still has a shot to get to this Big 12 championship game. And I came on this podcast last week laying out the scenarios of what needed to go right for 2 weeks for Baylor to get there. Well, week 1, so far, so good. Baylor's not alone in this endeavor. There are at least 8 teams. I'm hearing 8 teams. I'm hearing 9 teams that can still qualify for this Big 12 championship game. Sorry, TCU, you're not one of them. That's a real shame. That is a real shame. But according to the Big 12 Conference, which sent out a memo on Sunday, entering week 14, 9 teams are still in contention for this. So that's the number I'm going with. 9 teams can still get there. In fact, my favorite matchup of all of this is still alive, and that is Baylor versus Texas Tech. The Butt Bowl in Arlington, the way it was for, a decade? Decade and a half? A little over a decade we did that in Arlington at Jerry World for all the marbles. That's crazy that can still be on the board. But let me read you through this memo first, because this is going to be the tiebreaker. So this can involve all of these 9 teams. If you're a fan of any of these 9 teams that are just checking in on Locked On Baylor for these crazy scenarios, your team is going to be mentioned here. So there are 2 team tie scenarios and 3 team tie scenarios. The 3 team tie scenarios, if Colorado loses and there's 3 teams tied, that is going to be Arizona State versus Iowa State. If Arizona State loses, it'll be Iowa State versus BYU. If Iowa State loses, it'll be a rematch of what we had this past Saturday, Arizona State and BYU. If BYU loses in this 3-team tie scenario, following a BYU loss, even this is confusing me, guys. If Tech defeats West Virginia, then Baylor beats Kansas and Cincinnati beats TCU. If all of those things happen, it'll be Colorado versus Iowa State. Otherwise, with those scenarios, it'll be Colorado versus Arizona State. But if West Virginia defeats Texas Tech, it would be Arizona State versus Iowa State. And in a 4-team tie scenario, it will also be Arizona State versus Iowa State. Now, here is the key part for Baylor and for Texas Tech specifically. And Kansas State as well. For teams who are 5-3 entering the week, they must win and see at least 3 of the 4 6-2 teams take a loss. Okay, let's go through that pretty quickly here. So when we pull up the Big 12 standings and who is still alive in this thing, the 9 teams that are still around, you have got the 3 teams with 2 losses, see, it's already confusing me. There are 4 teams, like I just said a few minutes ago, 4 teams that stand at 6-2. That's Arizona State, Iowa State, BYU, Colorado. And then after that, you have got 5 teams at 5-3. That's Baylor, Kansas State, TCU, not in it, Texas Tech, and West Virginia. So 4 5-3 teams that can still get there. Now, what Baylor needs, and this is the big part of this, they need to beat Kansas first and foremost, no doubt. But then they need 3 of these 4 things to happen. BYU losing to Houston. The game is in Provo. Arizona State losing to Arizona. Colorado losing to Oklahoma State. And Iowa State losing to Kansas State. Right now, Baylor has a 12% chance to get there. So they need 3 of those 4 things to happen. And the bad news for Baylor is a lot of those things, it's not likely. Okay? Kansas State could well beat Iowa State. That is possible. And they're playing for a chance to get to Arlington as well, and a chance to keep Iowa State from that 10-win plateau that they have never reached and keep them out of the conference championship game. So all kinds of scenarios in that Farmageddon thing. All that to say, Kansas State will be very much motivated. Colorado will lean to lose to Oklahoma State. That's unlikely. That's Quite unlikely. Arizona State needs to lose to Arizona. Also unlikely, but is a rivalry game. And there's talent for Arizona. We have not seen it come together like really, truly this year. But when you've still got Fafita and McMillan, crazy things can happen. And BYU would need to lose to Houston at home. We just saw what Houston could do. I doubt it. So yeah, that first week scenario was easier for Baylor than the second week scenario, but these things can happen. And I have just scoured for this, like all through all these different scenarios, these memos, these tweets, and everything. I bookmarked about 12 tweets, but from what I can tell, those are the two that we need to focus on. That memo from the Big 12, and basically what Baylor needs is to beat Kansas and have 3 of those 4 things happen. 3 of those 4 6-2 teams in the conference need to lose. Now, it really stinks that you lost the tiebreaker to 2 of these teams in 1-score games, that being BYU and Colorado. Yes, I've seen it in the comments of almost every video I've posted the last 2 or 3 weeks. That Colorado game comes back big time, right? That Hail Mary, if they kept CU off the board, they would have had a very real chance to be playing for the Big 12 championship in a couple of weeks. So Tech, on the other hand, like Baylor, is in that 5-3 scenario. So they will also need 3 of those 4 things to happen. And this is why it fascinates me, because Baylor and Tech are not part of those games. Tech against West Virginia, who also has a chance, will also need those 3 things to happen. And Baylor, obviously, against Kansas, which is weirdly somehow still a part of this as well, because there are 9 teams that are still up for grabs for it. And one of them's not TCU, which is a 5-3 team. So Kansas at 4-4, I guess, I don't know what their scenario is, but they can still get there. I don't know. I didn't have time to look at all of these guys. But Baylor and Tech will both need the same things to happen. And that's what fascinates me. They're not playing each other. They're not playing any of those 6-2 teams. So they are in the same boat in terms of winning and scoreboard watching. You can add West Virginia to that as well. Those teams are winning and scoreboard watching. And so this chaos can completely play out. And there is still a small chance that we can get the Butt Bowl in Arlington for the Big 12 championship. Crazier things have happened. It's a crazy scenario. But when you look at how many teams are in this boat going into Saturday, going into the final week of the season, it almost feels like anyone has just as good a chance as anybody in this conference. Like the crazy crap we have seen in this conference this year. BYU was a shoo-in for a home team in the college football playoff 2 weeks ago, and they lost to a team that was 3-6 at the time. At home, they lost to Kansas. Now, Houston has nothing to play for, but they do have a ton of pride from what we saw in this game against Baylor on Saturday, right? They've got a new head coach in there who is getting them to play real motivated football, right? They know BYU, all the pressure's on BYU, and they could go in there and potentially knock them out of the playoff hunt. That's the other great thing about these teams that are battling for at that 5-3 is they can play spoiler for potentially 3 teams in the college football playoff. Maybe even all 4. Like realistically right now, Colorado, BYU, Iowa State, and Arizona State all have a real chance at the college football playoff. It's not looking as good as it was 2 weeks ago, but Arizona, Iowa State, BYU, they sit at 10-2 and they're the conference champs. They're probably sneaking in. Baylor and West Virginia and Tech and Kansas can all muddy those waters. God, I love this conference. And I'm not one of those people that's like, oh, like the A&M are like SEC, because we suck at everything. So we want the conference to be good. I'm not like that. I like the Big 12. But I wouldn't mind seeing this chaos stuff happening, even if it means we sacrifice a team from the 12-team playoff, which would be, embarrassing in a way. and wouldn't give you much of a leg to stand on. But that committee and ESPN, they're trying to keep you out anyway. They're looking for any excuse to keep you out of the playoff. So let's get some chaos going here. This is what this conference is all about. Let's get some real, actual final day chaos. And let's get a Baylor Texas Tech matchup in Arlington, or a Baylor Colorado matchup in Arlington, or a Baylor BYU or Baylor Iowa State. I don't know how likely that is to happen, but it's all likely to happen. It can all happen. Let's get Baylor Arlington on December 7th. Boy, we can have some real chaos in this conference, and I am totally here for it. Let me know what you think, guys. Who do you think is going to make this? What is the most likely scenario? What is the most fun scenario? And who is going to be going to Arlington? I want your predictions. Drop that down in the comments below. Whew. Thank you for making it to the end of the video, and thank you for making the Locked On Podcast Network part of your daily routine. We have got you covered with the most Baylor Bears athletics coverage of any outlet that's not directly tied into Baylor University. So if you want more of that, be sure to like and subscribe. Ring that notification bell to get notified every time we're dropping a video here on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks, and sick 'em.